For search result quality, it's joint work with Martina, Jens, and Patricia. When one thinks about internet search, obviously one has to at least keep in mind that there's a big player in this market, and that would be Google here. Of course, we all know that Google's market share is close to 100%, at least approximately. What you can see here on this figure is how it changed over time. So what I put in here is this little symbol. So that's meant to depict that ChatGPT came about and changed everything, at least in some sense. So one could expect, well, maybe it does something to search. And here in February 2023, Bing got some functionality based on ChatGPT technology, basically providing a new type of search. But at least until, let's say, the end of last year, nothing much has changed in terms of the market share for Google. But it's kind of interesting because some people have at least argued that it could have quite a big impact. And of course, this could still come in the future. Now, the motivation for this paper here is, of course, what I just showed you. The market for internet search is highly concentrated. Looking a bit back, it's actually interesting that in the 90s and early 2000s, there was some sort of competition in this market, but then Google sort of took over. And since then, Google has been leading here in this market. What we think about in particular here in this project, or have in the backs of our minds at least, is that there's a vicious circle going on. So Google has most users. These users would when they use Google, produce data on past searches. So what are these data? I will be more explicit in a bit, but essentially Google provides them with a menu of search results, and they click on search results, and one can see this as a revealed preference measure for something users find helpful. So basically click-through rates. So Google has most users, therefore most data. And for that reason, at least potentially, can provide better search results. And of course, it's a whole ecosystem, what Google offers. So all this is integrated with other apps. And the big question that is at least around in the discussion for a while now, and we have seen some policy action, of course, recently related to that. Should the market be regulated? And if so, how? And on the right here, you see just a depiction of what I just said. Data leads to the user experience because more data gives better search results. This creates more demand for the services offered by Google. And this, again, creates more data and so on and so forth. So what we do here is, to some extent, a measurement exercise. Obviously, the user experience depends on many factors. When you think about it, it's actually not so easy to measure basically these effects that I just talked about, so to quantify these effects. We have one relatively well-defined goal for this paper here. What we want to measure is the dependence of the quality of non-personalized search results on the amount of data a search engine has available, holding the algorithm fixed. So what we want to get at is this production function, producing search results as a function of the data you put in as an input. Our approach was not to work together with Google, but we worked together with a search engine that is much smaller and tried to enter this market. And I will tell you more about their motivation and business model later. What this search engine allowed us to do is to keep the algorithm it had as it was, and to vary the amount of data it used as an input to provide search results. And then we could look at these search results and measure the quality and see to what extent the quality depends on the amount of data, and for which queries it actually depends on the amount of data. The results are measures of the dependence of search engine quality on data, and we do this by the popularity of the search term or of the so-called query. And that turns out to be really important, and in some sense, doing things by popularity of the search term or query is already a big step in this paper, and you will see this in the results. As a byproduct, what we get is measures of quality across search engines, because we came up with a way of assessing quality, but this is of course useful to see how quality varies when we vary the amount of data we put in as an input. But that's a within search engine variation. But of course, it's also interesting to look at this across search engines. And therefore, we also got search results from Google and Bing, and also assessed the quality of those. And this also gives us some interesting results. There are, of course, some limitations. These limitations are inherently linked to what we're doing and how we're doing it. So Clicks is all about privacy, and this is the search engine we cooperated with, and they provide non-personalized search results, or at least this is what they gave us. That's one. The second one is our experiment is we couldn't give them data and ask them, produce new results. What we asked them to do is to drop data. So in that sense, it's backward looking. That's the second limitation. A third one is that to some extent, what we're doing is local to clicks. It could be all very different for Google. And we have some indication that this is not the case, but we can't be 100% sure. And the last limitation, and I will explain in detail why this is to some extent a limitation, is that we keep the algorithm fixed. So what one has to think about is, if you drop data, wouldn't you want to retrain the algorithm and sort of end up with worse parameters for that algorithm? Good. Let me, if there are no questions, jump into a little bit of background information that is just useful for understanding what is going on. So what we see here is on top we see what is a query. So I call this before the search term. This is what you type into either the address bar of your browser or into the field in like a search engine like Google. Then what you would get as a result is search results. And here in this particular example, there are no sponsored search results, so people haven't bid on this query. But you see here the organic search results. And one important thing, this is just a side note that is really important from a like effects perspective. There is like the first page that people see on their screen, and then there's everything that comes down there when you scroll. What is really, really important is what comes on top. And we've seen this in all kinds of contexts, and obviously we've seen papers discussing that. Now, when people search, what is generated is data. So what you see here is an illustration of that. So this is basically what is happening. People type in a query, and then they get a set of results. And then what is kept track of is what they actually clicked on. Okay, so somebody typed this in and clicked on this URL. Somebody typed this in, clicked here, and so on and so forth. So this is literally a log, right? So this is just recording all the activity that has taken place.
Sorry, Tobias.
Yep.
The log doesn't include the other viable URLs which were listed on the page?
Yeah, so an important qualification is from my side that we have tried our best to understand how this is done. As far as I understand, this is not recorded. You can, of course, reconstruct it. You're asking, like, does it record the choice set, if I understand you correctly? Is that right? Yeah,
That's
so
correct,
as far as I understand, this can be reconstructed, but is not recorded.
Okay.
But I'm happy to be corrected on that one. Maybe it's
Is that,
partially.
is that general for all search engines, or is it just for the one you worked with?
Yeah, so I'm lacking the technical knowledge here. Maybe people who are closer to companies, they know more about this. But whenever I've talked to companies, they told me that they don't record everything and they don't seem to record. So, for instance, for search, right? They often record what people click on, but not all the things they could have clicked on. And my working assumption here is that this is also the case here. So my thinking is that they mainly record what people did, but not what they could have done. Yeah, they don't want to have exploding data warehouses, as far as I know. But maybe Greg has some insight on this and can share some later. No, yeah.
The only thing I know I'm moderating rather than commenting. However, I seem to remember going to a presentation by Hal Varian when he was talking about all the experimentation that Google did to improve its search. And I think that he said that they also looked at whether people bounce back immediately. So they click on something and do they stay there or do they bounce back immediately? If they bounce back immediately, clearly it was a bad choice.
Yes, exactly. I've seen that also in papers. One measure of search result quality is whether people basically go back and search again, right? Or click on two of the results. But the last one they click on is often deemed to be the best one. So that's one way to think about it. But as far as I know, not all the search results are saved. But again, this is my working assumption. So yeah. So these query logs one can take and can turn them into counts. And this is an abstraction or simplification, if you like. So this is a query, Lady Gaga best songs. And there's another query, Lady Gaga hits. And then what is saved, and you can think of this as a big table, URL 1, 100 times has been clicked, 2, 30 times, 3, once. For the second one, 120, URL 4, 10 times, URL 5, 2 times. So this is what we think of as data. And that's not 100% accurate, but we have checked with clicks, with people we have talked to there, and they said this is good enough an abstraction for what you guys have in mind. It's much more complicated in reality. Now comes a new query, and that query has never been there. So Lady Gaga best hits. So that's a combination, or it should be related to these two. What a smart algorithm will do is to figure out basically how this new query relates to the two old ones for which I have data, and then it will produce search results. And these search results, they will somehow involve these URLs that people also clicked on for the other two queries, because the new query is related to the old queries for which the search engine already has some data. So you see this also here. It produces some results, and the results are URL 1, 4, 2, and 5. So it's 1, 4, 2, and 5 that the algorithm would deem relevant in response to this query. Now, what is the experiment that we did with clicks? So let me first tell you about clicks and give you a bit of background information. This is also useful for understanding the experiment. So clicks had the goal of doing things differently from Google. In particular, their thing was to safeguard privacy of users. So Google's business model, in a very abstract way, is to provide a good service to its users, and then to sell advertising and make money with that in order to finance all this quality it provides to users. Now, the concern that many people raise and people feel a bit uneasy about is that on the way, Google collects a lot of data. So basically, Google is not known for putting privacy first. And some people are fine with that, and others are not fine with that. So the idea of Clicks was, let's try to find a way of preserving privacy by basically moving the computation related to showing personalized ads to the users. So to kind of not give one party lots of data on users, but to build a privacy friendly version of Google's business model. I don't want to focus much more on that, so because this would be a completely different talk. But what one should keep in mind is that privacy was the main motivation for doing all that. But yet it was important also to make money at some point in time. Clicks did collect data, and in fact, quite some data, and that's also important to keep in mind when looking at our results. So in 2017. Firefox, that's a browser that was fairly popular in countries like Germany, where Clicks was also based. Firefox had, like, for 1% of the users, a Clicks extension built in, and there was an opt-out mechanism behind it, so people could opt out. And what this extension would do is to collect data on what users have been doing, including when they went to Google, searched for something, and then clicked on something. Okay, so this was data Clicks actually collected, but in an anonymized way. So these data could not be linked back to users. One could, of course, now have concerns about that as well. But in any case, it produced quite some data that they could use to build their search engine. Okay. Now, then we got in touch at some point, actually after they had done this. Yeah, before COVID hit, but then during COVID, we did an experiment with them, our experiment with them. Yeah, the end of the story is that after this was one thing they still wanted to do. And 2 days after conducting our experiment, they actually announced that they would go out of the market. They were part of a bigger media firm, and that media firm pulled the plug. And our interpretation is that the management of Clicks, and they have always been very forthcoming, they really thought it was worth doing this experiment, so they pushed this through. But 2 days later, they had to stop. So they announced that they would shut down this browser and the search engine on May 1, 2020. And it was a very small firm in some sense, 45 employees. They all found other jobs quite easily during the pandemic, but still. This is the Clicks story in a nutshell. Now, the experiment was now the following. So we can think of an algorithm as having parameters theta, many parameters. Also ChatGPT, this model has many parameters. It produces a set of search results R for a given query Q, and a given index I and data in D. Okay, what is the index? The index is simply a directory of all the URLs that are around on the internet. So you can relatively easily compose such an index, put it together by just crawling the internet. So that's not the the huge job? The huge job is to get enough data to make sense of the index. Okay, so again, the search results are a function of the query, what I type in. The index, that's just like a phone book, like the directory of all the URLs. It's basically a list of phone numbers. D is the amount of data from past usage of the search engine, and theta are the parameters. What are the usual dynamics? The usual dynamics are that users use a search engine. They produce data. So data D here grows over time. So you get more data in D. And once in a while, or maybe even continuously, you can use the data to retrain the algorithm. And one can think of this as finding a better theta. Okay, so theta in some sense is a function of the amount of data one has available, and one can always think of the index as more or less stable over time. And you would update it, of course, if new websites come about, but that's not the big deal as far as we are concerned here. What is the experiment? The experiment is now that we drop some of the data in D while keeping theta and I as it was for the full data. When we do that, what we can do is we can produce new search results for the same query Q. Okay, and then we can look at them and ask ourselves, how good are they actually? What does it mean to drop data? Dropping data means two things. So when you look at these two queries here, and these are the query log counts, when we drop 50% of the data, let's say, then 100 becomes 50, 30 becomes 15, and out of 1, it would be 0.5, but then we round downwards, so that would become 0. So that URL would vanish. But by and large, for large numbers, the relative numbers would stay the same. Okay, but of course, the algorithm could still base its results not only on the relative numbers, but also on the absolute numbers. So that is taken on board here. We do this by, as I said, by using buckets, and these buckets, they measure the popularity of the queries. That's actually quite interesting, we think. What we do is we form first 5 buckets, or they form 5 buckets. So we followed their advice. So they said we could do it like this, and we said okay. And then within each bucket we have 1,000 queries. And then what we do is we drop data. So we get 12 levels of data availability, and then we always get new search results. And this was all run overnight on Monday, April 27, 2020. Now, first the buckets for some background information. So the 5th bucket is the bucket with the least popular queries, and the first bucket is the bucket with the most popular queries. These are 0.2% of all queries. At the same time, what you see here is that 11% of the traffic actually comes from these very few queries. And then here you see the average number of searches per week per query. Yeah, the least popular queries, these are 75% of the queries. Each of them is searched on average once per week. And they generate more than half of the traffic. So that's important to know as background information, because in some sense, one can already intuitively, see that maybe it's easy to produce good search results here for the most popular queries, and it's hard to produce them down here. But down here, these are the ones that are really generating a lot of traffic. How did we assess the quality? We did various things. We did human assessment, and we did so-called automated assessment. Automated assessment is basically to compare the search results to the ones of Google, and to calculate the percentage overlap. They should probably not be the same. when they're equally good, but one can see interesting patterns when one does that. I don't have time to go into the details here. The main thing we look at is human assessment. So we take the actual search results and we ask people to say, you know, how good are these search results without telling them whether they're from Google, Bing, or clicks. And we just give them five search results, and then we ask how good are these search results. And then we also created blended result sets simply by taking all the results we got and then asking them, out of these five, which one is actually the best one? And I'll show you a screenshot, then it becomes more clear. We do this for a sample because this takes a lot of time. All this is centered on Germany. So we get the result sets as if we were Googling or using clicks from Germany. Then there can be English speaking queries or German speaking queries. We select the ones with at least 3 characters. And then, as I said, we evaluate the top 5 results for Google, Bing, and clicks. And for clicks at 5 levels actually of user data. Because also here it takes time, and we wanted to have reasonable numbers per query. Good. And for this, we used 2 arrays, one English-speaking one, one German-speaking one, and 587 so-called click workers. So think of this as Amazon, Mechanical Turk, or prolific workers. Good. So this is what we showed to the evaluators related to a query. So what you see here is the results here on the right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then on the top left, the question, how satisfied are you with the results overall? So the set of the 5 results, that could even include, and even though we didn't say this explicitly, but it could include the ordering, completely satisfied up to completely dissatisfied, as if no results at all. And then also we asked people to say, you know, which ones are the best and the second best, respectively. And we told them in the instructions that they actually should read the text here, and they should look at the results in order to judge. That was part of the brief, so that, you know, they were encouraged to actually follow those links. Good. In the interest of time, let me jump right to the results of all this. So what you see here is for clicks, Bing, and Google, the average rating. And this is really the overall average across all queries, popular, not so popular. And what you see here is, on average, we're somewhere between mostly satisfied and somewhat satisfied, 5 and 6. So we gave them these meanings for those numbers. And we see to some extent what we would expect, right? So Google comes out on top here. Bing is a close follower, and clicks is less good. So this is what probably drives also consumer choice. And so clicks was not very popular, and this could be the reason for that. The results were simply not as good as Google's. And we said, okay, but how does this look when we now differentiate by popularity of the query? And what we see then is actually quite interesting, we thought. So for the most popular queries, the quality is very similar across the 3 search engines. Yes, clicks is slightly worse, but Bing comes out even better than Google. But the more you go to the right, the least popular these queries are. Okay, and in particular here, for the rarest queries that generate, each of them generates not a lot of traffic, but together they generate most of the traffic on a search engine. For a search engine, what we see is that clicks is clearly much worse than Bing, which is again worse than Google. So what this hints at already is that it might be actually the popularity of the query that is really, really important here in the background. The second way we look at the data is this one here, and we do this in various ways. So with various measures for search result quality, but it always looks more or less like this. So what you see here is the following. We have a 1. So this is only for clicks now. 1 is an assessment of the quality of the results for the data clicks had available, and then by popularity of the query. So here you have 5 dots corresponding to the 5 panels I had in the previous figure. So these are the same numbers as we had in the previous figure for clicks. But then what we did in addition was to drop data. Okay, so for half of the data, we got more search results from clicks, and then we evaluated them as well. And then also for 20%, 10%, and 1% of the data. So what we asked them to do, or what they could do for us, was to keep the algorithm what it was, and to simply drop some of the data to manipulate, if you will, the query log counts, and give us new search results. And what we see then is that for the most popular queries, dropping half of the data is really not a big deal. Dropping 80% of the data is not a big deal. Dropping 90% of the data is not a big deal. It even produces slightly, well, if you just look at the dot here, better search results, but you also have the confidence intervals here, of course. Only for 1% of the data, they do worse. But then when you move down here for the rare and rarest queries, what you see is a clear slope. So you drop half of the data and the results are worse, and you drop 80% of the data and they're even worse, and so on. So you get like this concave shape out of all this. Here, what we did was to use the alternative measure, which is the average overlap of the search results with Google. The overlap is not 1. So this is also interesting. We did this for the top 3, the top 5, as far as I remember. It is not 100%. What this might suggest is that one can probably produce equally good search results, at least in the eyes of the assessors, without producing Google's search results. So it probably means that Google is also not almighty, and you know, maybe other search results are equally good for the same query. But importantly, what we see is for the popular queries, things are still flat here. So we don't see much of a difference in terms of the shape, and we get this gradient back. For the rare and rarest queries. What we see here is another way to look at it. So this would be the position of the best rated results. What our analysis gives us by design is actually the best URL for a given query. If we just take a step back, what we did was we took a query and we put it to clicks. They gave us results. Then we gave it to Google and to Bing. And then we took all of these results and created a list of candidates that are most likely, that was most likely to contain the very best result. And then we asked our assessors to tell us which result in their eyes actually the best one was. And what this gives us is this figure here, if we then analyze it. So for 100% of the data, the very best result in the eyes of the users, this was the fraction of times this was actually shown by clicks. Okay, so in that sense, this is meaningful. yeah, so it was also shown as the best result here, right? And when we have less data, as you can see here, this was less likely to be the case. Okay, so the yellow area is basically growing. This means that the more data clicks as available, the more likely it is to show the very best result. Now you can say, hey, is Google now almighty or not? This is a byproduct of our analysis. What we see is that actually for Bing and Google, it looks like this. Okay, so here this is what Google produces. So this tells us that the very best result in the eyes of our assessors is not like the one that Google always shows, but of course the likelihood that Google would show this is bigger than for Bing. And from the other analysis, we understand that this is mainly driven by the queries that are rare or rarest. So this is how we go, in some sense, full circle. Now, so one way to think about these results is that it seems that as if a small search engine can actually produce non-personalized search results that are as good as Google's, if it has access to enough data on past searches. So we can arguably learn this from looking at the popular queries. We know that users care about search result quality. So in a way, the market for internet search is data-driven, or in some sense, the data-drivenness comes into play because the search engine does not seem to have enough data for the rare queries to make use of its algorithm and produce good search results there. And this hints at mandatory data sharing as a policy reaction, which of course has in the meantime been implemented in the Digital Markets Act. And in that sense, our paper provides some empirical justification for doing that. More generally, what we like to think is that our approach can be applied to other markets and services as well. Our measurement approach to basically vary the amount of data, produce some sort of results, search results, and then to measure in some way how much consumers like those results. That's what I had. Thanks a lot.
Well, you make moderation very easy by being A, extraordinarily clear, but B, extraordinarily on time. So thank you
Glad
very
to hear.
much. And I'll hand over to Greg for his discussion. Greg, I realized I didn't actually introduce Tobias, but he may have done that already, but he's from Tilburg. Greg is from the University of Zurich, but I hadn't actually realized until I got the email for this session that he's also now the chief economist at Zalando. So he may describe what that is, but I dare say that means that he has to deal with search results actually in reality these days, albeit of a specific sort. So, Greg.
Yeah, so thanks very much to you all for the invitation, and Toby for the paper. I really enjoyed reading it. I too ran an experiment, which is, so for those of you that don't know, Zalando is I'm a shoe salesman now. So we sell shoes and clothing throughout Europe, not so much in the UK, but especially we're in 25 European countries. So so I also ran an experiment, which is I read the paper and I thought, okay, so what are the comments I would give? And then I subsequently reached out to 3 of our applied scientists that are active in our search products and solicited their very brief thoughts. To be fair, I was trying to be conscious of their time. And I can confidently say that the quality of their contributions is higher than the quality of my contribution. Although you'll get, Toby, the bundled product. You'll get the full McCoy. So let me start by saying that I think this is just a hugely important research question, right? And this is from this, and most of what I'm going to say now is with my professor hat on, and sort of the, when, previous to joining Zalando, I of course was fairly involved in European, interest. I took an interest in policymaking in the space, and I continue to have that interest. And so this really is important because if we want to have more competitive outcomes in search markets, we need to understand what are the factors that drive competition and drive those outcomes. And there's, at least in the economics literature, not very much evidence in this area. And so, Toby, I think what you and your co-authors have done is a super important first step. So, so kudos to you for this, and keep going. Let me say then that when I was reading the paper, my first comment actually was also a comment that two of the other search applied scientists also came up with, which is, what do we mean here by data, right? So data, I mean, in the paper, there's this idea that more data is better. It's data is sort of a homogeneous idea, but when especially some of the applied scientists, the data scientists, were thinking about it. I think, is it enough? Is it just more data is better? And so, in particular, you yourself mentioned these are the non-personalized search results. So how important is personalization for search results? And you did say this is what they gave us, right? So that suggests that maybe there's a dimension of search result quality that had you incorporated personalized. Now, don't get me wrong, Toby. I'm raising this question, and I fully realize you may not be able to do anything about it, but just to be aware that how specialists might think about this, and how then you want to craft the paper, and ultimately, if you're speaking to policymakers about it, because I think that's really where the payoff of this paper really lies, is the potential to hopefully influence policy. And in particular, one of the applied scientists mentioned, actually, well, more data here might even mean fresher data, right? And so freshness in a search context can be quite important, something I hadn't thought of. So just to feed that back. Now why I think that these comments about what do we mean by data are actually quite important is a little bit, how relevant is the experiment you ran for the policy space that we hope that it speaks to, right? Because and especially where I got a little bit lost is, I understand that the algorithm was trained on the full data, but then the predictions from the algorithm were in the experiment was to increase or decrease the amount of data on which that algorithm was ultimately going to be able to use to make its ultimate prediction. And that mapping was not fully clear to me, neither in the paper nor in the presentation, which is totally reasonable. I mean, I'm sure it's not simple. And I realize these guys no longer work at Click, so it might be even hard to figure that out. But I do think that's important in the sense of, can this experiment inform policymaking? Like, is it relevant to the actual environment in which competitors got access to data from, say, a Google or a Bing? Because at some level, maybe maybe this is, your results could have been in some sense far worse, right? Is if they had actually trained the algorithm on this smaller set of data, and then also used the smaller set of data to ultimately. And so to the extent you can address that, I think that would be super interesting. Let me say the final comment actually comes as sort of a blend of what one of the most junior applied scientists itself. So I talked to sort of a senior leader, a mid leader, and then the junior guy. And the junior guy had, as ever, the most detailed comments, and best in this case, in my view. And that is, so he pointed me to something called neural scaling laws. Okay, and so this is, you can look this up on Wikipedia, but it's for a class of machine learning models based on neural networks. And it says there are 4 key variables that relate to each other in terms of where one of the variables is just model performance. So that's sort of the outcome variable, but there are 3 key drivers of performance: model size, training data size, and computational cost. Right, and at some level, I think your paper speaks to 2 of those. Right, model size and training data size, but not so much. I mean, if you like, you can say, well, model and computational costs can be bundled together, and you can call that your theta. I think that's fine. But the issue here, and so I know very little bit about this. He's pointed me to a few papers. I'll share these papers with you. You can, then come up to speak a little bit on this. But that all 3 of these things matter. So, for example, he shared with me that for OpenAI, if you increase, they learned that if you increase the computational complexity of the model by a factor of 8, you only needed to increase the amount of training data by a factor of 5, right? So that, you know, these are big factors, obviously, but there's actually previous research, if you like, in the data science machine learning space that maybe speaks to the exact same question that you're looking at, that you can then maybe rely on and learn from, right? But now here's where I want to add something, which is this is unbelievably important from a policy perspective, right? Because at some level, your paper is talking about data, but imagine Clicks or some other competitor had access to all the data in the world, that all the data that Google or Bing has. If that's not enough to actually generate competitive results, if you also need that model complexity, which sounds to me like applied scientists, and the computational costs, which sounds to me like cloud computing, like, and big budgets for it, then data sharing alone won't actually work in this space, right? And so we economists need to understand the technology in all of these markets, but let's start here with search, if we actually want to help foster competitive outcomes, right? And what and these were like 5-minute answers from people that work in this area, immediately highlighting, hey, maybe it's not just the data here. And now it may be that your paper can't speak to that, but I think when you craft the policy section, flagging that and saying, look, we haven't touched on these other 2 aspects, which may be as or even more important, or you know, these are complements that you need all of them in order to ultimately generate competitive outcomes. Because what we don't want, or at least what I don't want, is someone to say all we need to do is give them the data. Then somehow we, you know, through a huge political fight, the data becomes available and it doesn't make a difference, right? So if we're going to design a regulatory intervention, we have to design one that actually could. And so, and I'd be happy to put you, I mean, if these guys are interested, put you in touch with the people at Zalando or whatever, you know, and tying into, you know, so I'm happy to help, you know, move you in that space, because I do think it's critically important. Anyway, I stopped there. I know I ran long. So I made your job a little harder, Amelia, but